fear is the mind killer. The raising of fear has a direct, measurable consequence on death rates. And it's being done again and again for commercial purposes, for political purposes, for all kinds of various agendas. They are behaving in ways that are grossly unhuman, anti-human. Then our children are locked into a world where they are basically serfs to these large transnational organizations. The politicians don't have any choice. They have to go along with these egregious terms and conditions because they're no longer in control.
Welcome to Beyond Perception. I'm Simon, your host. My guest today is Dr. Robert Malone. Robert, you are an internationally renowned physician and scientist known for inventing the original mRNA vaccines in '89. You hold multiple patents and gene delivery formulations and vaccines, have authored nearly 100 peer-reviewed publications with over 9,000 citations. You are the author of Lies My Government Told Me, and your Substack is read by hundreds of thousands of people every day. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks. And just to put a pin on it, we've just opened pre-sales for our new book, which should be out in the end of August, which is called PsyWar, Enforcing the New World Order. So you can get that on Amazon, and it'll be shipped towards the end of August.
Amazing. That's one of the topics I want to touch with you. And just to give a brief overview to you and our listeners, what I'd love to explore with you, personal experience with censorship, including character assassination, why and how infectious disease is weaponized, what psychological bioterrorism is, what fifth generation warfare is about, your upcoming book, and who's behind the globalist agenda. Most importantly, what can we do to stay free? So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Well, the last one is the hardest question of all. What can we do to stay free, and how do you define freedom? I just put out an essay yesterday about this book, What Has the Government Done with Our Money? That really provides deep insight. This is Rothbart's writing on the nature of money. And as I worked through it, worked through the book and then wrote my review, I realized that when Javier Milei says freedom, damn it, he's not just I'm talking about the president of Argentina, personally identified anarcho-capitalist, which is Murray Rothbard is one of the grandfathers of the Austrian School of Economics and really a grandfather of the anarcho-capitalist movement. But I realized that what Javier Milei was speaking about was not just personal freedom or freedom of speech or freedom of thought, but he was also talking about economic freedom. And our economic freedom is severely constrained now and about to get even more so with the attempts to globally implement central bank digital currency under the guidance of the Bank of International Settlements, which is really, as I worked through Rothbard's logic and I'm not an economist. I'm at best a student of economics. And find the Austrian school very compelling in its arguments, and particularly Rothbard. But I realized as I worked through this book that, as is outlined in the final chapters of the recent updated version, governments have been using inflation as a form of occult taxation for decades and decades. It's become the favorite tool of Western, let's call them democracies, because that's what the term is, favorite tool of the Western democracies to capitalize their welfare states and wars. The reason why the United States went off the gold standard under Richard Nixon was basically because of his challenges in capitalizing the Vietnam War and his desire to migrate to a fully decoupled currency that we call fiat currency, or the fiat currency dollar. And because once a government does that, then by working with central banks, they're able to manage economics more closely to their benefit, and to manage incremental inflation as a way to get rid of national debts, and as I say, capitalize large governmental expenditures like wars and the welfare state. And so when Javier Milei says freedom, damn it, he's not just talking about, as I said, personal freedoms. He's also talking about economic freedoms and the freedom to break away from fiat currency and the whole economic system that's built up around these independent fiat currencies and their problems. One of the key problems with fiat currency on a nation-by-nation level is that their rates of inflation differ, and this results in trade imbalances. It's what drives trade imbalances, among other things. It also drives diplomatic conflict and military conflict. But the way that the belief is that the best way to resolve this problem of basically independently floating rates of inflation in different trading partners is to establish a single fiat currency and a global bank that can regulate that single currency so that these inflation rate disparities don't develop between nation states. And this is all a workaround to overcome the consequences of decoupling national currency from anything of tangible value, typically metals, silver, gold, or both. And Rothbard really lays it out clearly. So that's, as you've listened to some of my writings or read them, you're probably aware that I'm not so focused on medical freedom anymore. I'm focused on freedom. I think freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to innovate, and economic freedom are absolutely essential. And how, in your final question, you ask, how do we stay free, basically? And that's a really tough question in the face of what we're encountering now with these globalized, harmonized efforts to control information, thought, feelings, speech, etc., and align it with approved narratives coming from a kind of central harmonized consensus that we could say is stemming from the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, from these various global public-private partnership or GP3 think tanks and influence organizations that are closely aligned with corporations. That's our challenge. In a way, as you know, Simon, because you chose to immigrate to Mexico, Mexico, with all its chaotic situation with the various warlords that exist there in, let's say, dynamic tension with the federales, there's an odd sort of freedom that derives from that when you have what's essentially a fragmented nation state with decentralized control. That's functionally what's happened. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying that the cartels are a good thing for Mexico or the world or anybody else, but it does point out this central truth that in the face of globalized control, a decentralized leadership structure offers many advantages. Of course, in Mexico, the challenge is to find a region that only has one warlord rather than two that are in the middle of a battle, and you are at risk of being caught between them. But Mexico, I think, is an interesting case study in one pathway to avoid this harmonized, globalized agenda that is being imposed. And lest the listener think that this is just a conspiracy theory that Dr. Malone is floating here, we have the recent lecture from Klaus Schwab in China at the latest World Economic Forum, in which he basically said that the solutions that are being proposed by the World Economic Forum have to be imposed on nation states. That it's really up to the plea that he was making, as I interpret it, was to the financial community, ergo these very large investment funds, bondholder organizations, et cetera, that really now truly do rule the world. I'm not going down the path of, there are those that make claims about Jewish banking family conspiracies and name specific banking families, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not there. But I think the evidence is overwhelming that the financial markets control nation states now. They are above nation states in terms of their power and ability to exert authority. You can see it very clearly in Europe. I read a fascinating essay the other day that was talking about the Malonification, referring to Giorgio Malone, of Le Pen and of the other kind of emergent center-right parties throughout Europe. And of course, Giorgio Malone being the poster child for this. She talked a big talk, but then once she was in government, in control, she really tempered all that. And largely that was a consequence of the bond market telling her that they would basically crash the Italian economy unless she went along with their rules and regulations and guidance and constrictions in terms of what options her government had available, other than pursuing these various social agendas. I mean, that's for European politicians under Brussels within the European Union, kind of their only options, as you probably are very familiar as a Swiss citizen looking out over Europe, that the European Union is largely controlled by this supranational organization that resides in Brussels, and individual nation states that formerly were sovereign are really subsidiary to that power. And then that power in Brussels that we call the European Council and the President, von der Leyen, they're really beholden to these very large financial interests. And beyond that, these kind of think tank pressure lobbying organizations that we call global public-private partnerships, those are really who's calling the shots now. And it all kind of gets codified in the structures that have been spun up by the United Nations under the current Secretary General, who is a Portuguese socialist and very much pursuing a socialist agenda within the United Nations. This is Agenda 2030. This is the assertion that human beings has a fundamental right to migrate, to live wherever they want in the world. That's what under that and the fact that many Western countries are facing a population crisis, much as China has, and their welfare state commitments can't be supported without an influx of younger workers because their populations are aging and shrinking. It's a tough situation, And I think the only, again, trying to get to your last question first, I think the only pathway forward for those of us who are aware, sometimes the term is used that we're awake rather than being woke. Those of us that value personal sovereignty and freedom in all its forms are really faced with the choice of kind of going along to get along with this new agenda that's referred to as the New World Order or the Great Reset, or now Starmer in the UK is calling it, saying that the UK needs I think he said a bigger reset or a larger reset. So the Great Reset isn't enough. They need an even bigger reset now in the UK under this left government. Those that don't want to live in that world are facing very few options. And all of those seem to be driving towards becoming more self-sufficient and seeking, I like to say, in my own context, I refer to the Ayn Rand book that is not very well read outside of the United States called Atlas Shrugged, and the idea of Galt's Gulch derives from one of the main characters, protagonist John Galt, who sets up an intellectual community in Colorado in the mountains that's self-sufficient, that is very much built around the concept of anarcho-capitalism, the idea that the state is not really necessary. And it's possible to assemble communities that are independent of nation state. It makes you're kind of living it. Rothbard makes the case that nation states are akin to local warlords, only they've gotten bigger. And this is all built on the thesis there's only two ways to build wealth. One is through labor and innovation, and the other is theft. And that taxation is functionally theft, and so is inflation. So that's my best answer to the last question is basic. One phrase that's used to describe this is intentional communities. It's only one way to express this idea of decentralized self-governance, but many around my sphere, I'm not wealthy, but for whatever reason, I find myself interacting with wealthy people these days, usually conservatives for some reason. And to a person, they're all scared silly about what's happening right now. And they're all seem to be seeking some form of refuge. Is it getting 2 or 3 additional visas? The other day I was contacted by a scientist, I'll hold her name, but she wanted me to help her get in touch with the president of El Salvador, who apparently is offering asylum and citizenship for scientists that have been censored. We're moving into a very, I don't like to be so negative, but it seems like a very dark place. And I don't have any answer other than the one that I personally pursue, which is to become more self-reliant.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I really appreciate about you, and that's also why I'm so excited and honored to speak to you, is that you really practice freedom of speech. You seem to say what you think, and it led to a situation where you experienced censorship yourself and character assassination, and you attracted massive negative attention. And I think And when I'm very honest, it's the same for me. And I think many people, they have this conscious or unconscious fear of saying the truth because there
Yes.
might be negative consequences.
Yeah.
They might be
We call it
expelled from
self-censorship.
society. Exactly.
Yes.
So they hold back, they comply to the rules, the narrative, society. And so I would love you to share a little bit from your own experience and also what you would say to someone who's afraid of saying what they think.
Okay, I'm going to tell another story. I love to tell stories to illustrate key points. I had a family show up at our gates a few days ago. It's a family with 5 children, a wife and a husband. He's an engineer. She's a 3rd-generation daughter of, I think, Methodist preachers from Eastern Washington. And they had a van. They were touring the country. He had just lost his job. He'd been fired as an engineer in Washington State, in Eastern Washington, which is more conservative here in the USA. And the reason he was fired is because he would not take the diversity, equity, and inclusion test and pass it. He did not agree to give the politically correct answers to the questions that were being asked. Essentially, this is a purity test. These DEI tests that they are forcing workers to go through in companies which do government contracting, or another aspect is any company or executive that wishes to present to the World Economic Forum has to show that their company is fully compliant with a series of things, including DEI, environmental social governance, ESG, and a number of other of these programs that are promoted by the World Economic Forum. And so you would think, well, why would anyone want to go through all that? And it's thousands of hours to comply for a mid-sized company. Why would any company want to go through that? How could you justify this non-productive labor expended on a social agenda? And the answer is because you have to do it if you want access to capital. As I said, capital right now is controlling politics. And it's these large transnational organizations, financial organizations, and this trade union that they've assembled, which we call the World Economic Forum, that was actually originally catalyzed by the CIA. So get back to the story. This young man and his family traveling show up at our gate. They stayed over in our guest house for a night. We all had dinner together. And he shared the story of his trajectory and how he had refused the jab, the mRNA vaccine, and that had been required. And then eventually that passed. But he talked about how all the people around him, as the deadline for receiving the vaccine came up, how they all stopped talking to each other and they wouldn't discuss the issues and they just kind of put their heads down. And then, so they passed through that, and right before the deadline, the Supreme Court basically blocked implementation of those government mandated vaccine programs. But then he saw this same exact trajectory among his peers with these DEI programs, and they were implemented in the same way. They caused the same kind of social dynamic within the workplace, et cetera. A few people surreptitiously talking to him about what they thought, but they wouldn't actually act on it, et cetera. And he dug his heels in and said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to fill out this form. I'm not going to agree to these terms and conditions. And so they fired him. So he told me this story, and my comment, I'm trying to counsel him and give him hope. My comment was, but at least you still own your soul. And that I think is where this comes down. Just a second, Jill, what's that?
I just wanted to, because I think you and who's ever listening might be interested that the House Judiciary Committee just came out with a report on harm, and you are centered in
On harm?
GARM.
GARM.
Agreement.
Oh, really?
So particularly, they pressured Joe Rogan in your interview to remove Spotify they were going to remove them from the GARM agreement. So
Oh, this is fascinating. So, Jill, apparently a report was just issued by the House Judiciary Committee, in which they say, in response to pressure from its members over COVID-19 statements made on Joe Rogan's podcast, GARM pressured Spotify to punish Mr. Rogan by applying GARM standards on Mr. Rogan's content. Late January 2022, Spotify met with Joe Barone, managing partner of Brand Safety Americas of Group M, a steer team member, to discuss so-called misinformation on Spotify. The alleged misinformation offered by Mr. Rogan was twofold. First, on the April 23, 2021 episode of his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, Mr. Rogan told his guest, comedian Dave Smith, his views about the COVID vaccine. Quote, "You're 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no. Are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? Look, don't do anything stupid, but you should take care of yourself." Second, on December 31st, 2021, Mr. Rogan featured Dr. Robert Malone, an early mRNA researcher and COVID-19 vaccine skeptic, on his podcast. While YouTube removed the episode, Spotify refused to take it down, but the event triggered Group M's outreach to Spotify was musician Neil Young's decision to remove his music from the platform, and it goes on. The GARM agreement is basically the tool that connects Google's monopoly on advertising to media platforms. If you are identified by the groups that control the GARM agreement that we were just reciting and reading that article from, that paragraph from the Senate Judiciary Committee or House Judiciary Committee, if you fall, you're identified as violating GARM agreement terms in terms of free speech, then anybody who wishes to use virtually any form of advertising, if they have your free speech on their platform, then they're excluded from that advertising. So basically, it's a way of demonetizing, in this case, Joe Rogan and Spotify or anyone else. This is the insidious nature, kind of the backroom mechanics of how all this works. Is it's not just the censorship industrial complex that has been identified, that involves academe and private parties and the government and fact checker organizations and CIA cutout organizations, etc. It's all enforcing the defamation and slander and censorship, etc. But it's also these organizations like the GARM that control all the advertising dollars. That's why you can't get any advertising, I'm sure, on your podcast, nor can I. We would fall under the terms of the GARM agreement, which would exclude us from access to any advertising. So Jill just brought that in, my wife and colleague, Dr. Jill Malone. And so that's why that got read, but because it was really germane to your question. So what's my experience? Well, I detail it at length in 200 plus pages in this new book. And in the book, we really go down a whole bunch of different rabbit holes, is a phrase that's used here in the States. I don't know about in Switzerland or Mexico.
Yeah.
These various warrens of information that you find yourself having to travel in order to discern truth and make sense of the experience that you encounter. And the book is very much about those journeys and what we've discovered in terms of things like this GARM agreement, the various tactics and strategies that are used in weaponizing fear of infectious disease. That's the psychological bioterrorism, and the whole series of steps that are now routinely deployed by intelligence agencies in order to build this momentum of fear and then weaponize it for whatever the objective is. This has been done repeatedly, and it's basically recognized as standard spycraft now, this series of steps that are taken. And there's we have a chapter in which we lay out the U.S. government's own words regarding disinformation and misinformation, how it's used, how it's weaponized. And as you read through it, the government is, of course, presenting this as examples of things that third parties do on alternative media, et cetera. But as you read through it, you realize the government itself has been using all of those strategies and techniques that it now is projecting that their opponents are using against them. Their opponents being, in most cases, ordinary citizens like myself or yourself that are merely seeking to share truth. But returning to my little comment about my visitor family and the engineer father, he's not going to have any problems getting another job. He's a competent engineer, maybe he's going to take a pay cut, but he's going to be able to continue to support his family. And one of the things that happens when you decide that you're not going to compromise your own soul, and you're going to stand up for your own beliefs and ethics, is that you find, again and again, you find that others around you in your circle of contacts recognize what you've done, recognize your courage, and find a variety of ways, both overt and surreptitious, to support you. And the other thing that happens that I personally find very empowering, encouraging, affirming, is these folks that come up to me in various meetings and say, I was very uncomfortable with what was going on. It didn't seem right, but I felt so alone and isolated. Of course, isolation is one of the key things that Matthias Desmet talks as a precursor for this mass formation process that leads to the growth of totalitarianism. But they say, I felt so alone and isolated, and then I heard you. And then I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew I was thinking clearly, and it gives them courage. And that was my other comment to my wayward colleague that came in through the front gate unexpectedly was, you've chosen to be a leader. You're leading not just for your family, but for all your friends and the people around you. And that's really important. You may compromise some of your pathways to riches or, full employment or whatever. It'll come at a cost, just like it's come at a cost for me. But isn't it a wonderful thing to have the opportunity to make a small difference through your actions in this crazy, messed up world? To have some small impact. And for me, as I approach 65 this year, I think it's a gift, an opportunity gift that I have to celebrate, that I find myself in a position at a late stage in my life where I'm able to do good and make a difference and help people in their lives and hopefully help them to achieve more of what they seek in their lives, freedom and personal sovereignty, that's something to celebrate. That's not something to bemoan or bitch and gripe about, and feel sorry for yourself. There's already so much self-victimization going on in our culture. It's just become a major theme. Oh, I'm a victim. I'm a victim of fill in the blank, right? This is the central thesis of wokeism, of this new cultural Marxism is we're all victims, and we're all, society is all fragmented into a hierarchy of victims. I refuse to play that game. I'm not a victim. I've chosen this path, and it has rewards and it has costs, as does anything. So I guess that's my coaching to your listeners that are seeking some words of wisdom or whatever insights from Dr. Malone after 4 years of defamation, slander, and attacks from every which way. Is don't whine, don't be a victim. If the saying that is often repeated, if you're taking flak, it means you're over the target. If you're being attacked in these various nefarious ways, that means you're probably doing something right, and you're getting through, because otherwise they wouldn't bother. So there's my thoughts on that topic.
Amazing. Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. So did you build some resilience in the meantime? Or did it change its meaning?
Yeah, resilience is a big word.
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk sent me a book about resilience the other day. Am I more resilient? I would say that I am, that I've been hit so many times that I've become less sensitive to the attacks. Is that resilience? If you want to define it as such, it's sometimes, the honest truth is, sometimes I do get a little depressed. It really bothers me that I'm attacked by people that ostensibly are on our side. And this accusation that I'm controlled opposition, that I'm CIA. I once counted 8 or 10 different ways that I'm accused of being a mass murderer. It does get tiresome. It's no fun. Having haters on you on a daily basis for 4 straight years is no fun at all. It affects my wife. It affects people around me. It's in part a business model. It relates to the corporate news business model of promoting fear. Promoting hate gets clicks and likes and follows and can be monetized, and you get more followers. And if you're going to promote hate, ideally you want to find a target who has a large following, because you can basically bootstrap off of that person. And so people that have larger followings become targets for these trolls and haters. Just not even over the subject matter, but really as a way to build their own presence. That's very discouraging. The honest truth is that after 4 years of all that I've seen, my faith in humanity has been a bit damaged, a bit bruised. I have kind of a native Pollyanna approach. I like to help people. I like to teach. I hug. My general rule of thumb is 3 strikes. People make mistakes, they misinterpret things. just because they may do something that causes you what you perceive to be harm doesn't mean they intended to do it. You have to watch for a pattern, and often those that have that pattern are narcissists or sociopaths or psychopaths. I mean, in that kind of dark triangle complex of personality disorders. But and they're out there, and our society seems to select for them. They select for them as leaders in business and in politics. But I choose to believe the best of people until proven otherwise. But I can tell you that the last 4 years, I'm that core sensibility has become a little bruised.
And you're writing, and you mentioned that before. On one hand, you mentioned the book you're about to release, but then also I read something, one of your pieces about psychological bioterrorism and fifth generation warfare. And there's this definition of fifth generation warfare that it's about a war of information and perception. So what is playing out in the world? Is this really a war of worldviews? You mentioned the soul before. Is this a worldview where we're something beyond form that is having this experience, and a worldview that is purely mechanical and rational and reduces us to matter? What's your take on this?
So we're psychology and basically marketing. The technology and psychology of marketing, which is also, it is also the psychology and technology of psychological manipulation of propaganda. Propaganda and marketing are cousins. It's only a question of intent. And propaganda is generally sorted into 3 bins, white, gray, and black. Black propaganda is the most insidious. That's the propaganda where the person that encounters it thinks that it's coming from this place when it's actually a surrogate that is promoting that messaging or that propaganda and using a cover so that the listener isn't even aware of where it's coming from. They're not able to perceive what the agenda is behind it, etc. This is what a lot of the defamation and trollery and there's a group in the UK that's a branch of the British military called the 77th Brigade that does this all the time. So what we're talking about is the interface of propaganda and warfare, which has always existed. I mean, you can read Sun Tzu in The Art of War, and The Art of War has a lot to do with propaganda and manipulation of perceptions and perceptions on the part of the enemy, and et cetera. Really many things that are now labeled as fifth generation warfare are covered in The Art of War. The genesis of this is the realization that, or kind of an academic thought structure that is used to help military strategists and tacticians think about warfare. That's the genesis of this language. The 5 generations of warfare, and the 6th is yet to be defined. But they all exist concurrently. It's all a big mix. It's not like they're discrete. Oh, we're all done with 4th generation warfare. Now we're all going to do 5th generation warfare. That's not the way it is. So 1st gen is kind of sticks and stones, conflicts between tribes, that kind of stuff. 2nd gen is where we start to get to mechanized warfare. You can think of the Civil War. In the American Civil War as a great example of 2nd generation warfare, where you have industrialization of war and powder, cannon, muskets, etc. Increasingly sophisticated Gatling gun. And then in really the first really clear example of third generation warfare is considered to be World War II. So World War I was more second gen, all the way through all the gas and everything else. And one of the things about second gen warfare is that it's top down. So you have generals reporting up, you have a chain of command. And the corporal or lieutenant down at the street level basically just does what he's told. In third gen warfare, as exemplified in World War II by the German Army and German Air Force, you delegate command authority down to battlefield commander level. So think Rommel with tanks, where he was able to exert his insights in mechanized warfare and second generation warfare tactically to really dominate a lot of the tank battles in North Africa, among other places. And the Blitzkrieg is another great example. Then we start to move into the post-World War II period where you have this pair of very dominant military forces at some sort of odd relationship that we call the Cold War. And in particular, we have the dominance of the United States globally, because all the other economies, developed economies, were basically decimated. And so the United States was able to step in, I assert, and others. This isn't, just my thinking. After World War II, they were basically able to step into the imperial empires of Europe that had lost the imperial states in Europe, Portugal, Germany, France, UK in particular, had all just had their economies destroyed. And so the United States was able to step into that situation. And a case is made that this is really Mr. Soros' story, is that he was able, with the assistance of the US government, and particularly the CIA, to step in and scoop up a lot of the assets of the former Soviet Union as it collapsed. That's the origin of his wealth. So this imperialism became a major theme. And so you ended up with huge imbalances of military power as the United States attempts to exert its will on the world in places like Vietnam. So in response to that, I was just listening to another podcast the other day from a very senior analyst, military advisor, who makes the case that Vietnam was an enormous blunder because the United States CIA and the United States government didn't recognize that in their whole theory of dominoes falling, that if Vietnam goes communist, then it's going to be allied with China, communist. They didn't realize that the Vietnamese hate the Chinese. And they never wanted to have anything to do. Vietnam is a product of basically resistance to China. And the French knew this well. So the whole thesis behind the Vietnam War was poorly thought out. But it gave rise to this guerrilla resistance movement that we called the Viet Cong, that became very masterful at using kind of local distributed propaganda based around political theories, etc. Of course, we lost that war. And then we have the cascade of Al-Qaeda, Iraq, the whole Middle East stew of conflict, Syria, etc., where we keep losing. These are all fourth generation warfare conflicts in which you have a growing role of propaganda mixed with kinetic warfare. It's very decentralized. Often you don't have a clear leader, etc. Fifth gen warfare takes that to the next level and is recognized by NATO as part of their new core battlefield strategy, which they call hybrid warfare. there's a general from the Russian state that is given credit for coming up with the thesis. I forget the name of the doctrine, but the thesis that wars don't have to be won anymore using tanks and bullets and missiles. They can be won much more economically and practically through the electoral process, the ballot box, by persuading populations. And that media warfare, what we're calling PsyWar in our book, and we use that term because that's the term the U.S. military uses. So, we didn't invent the term, psychological warfare, but it's built around the thesis that if you want to overcome a government, replace a government, the most efficient way for coup is not necessarily the old school strategy of assassinating the leader and then putting in your own surrogate or various variations. Character assassination is also assassination, but rather to use psychological manipulation and control the media in order to change the opinions of the population, the underlying population. So that's fifth gen warfare, basically. And this has been developed to a fairly advanced state by United States military, the British military, the Five Eyes Alliance, which is Canada, US, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. And really, as I said, has been operationalized by NATO now. NATO is far beyond its original mission of maintaining peace in the North Atlantic. It's clearly become an aggressive military force. And one only needs to get a decent data feed coming out of Ukraine to understand what that's all, where that goes. So that's the kind of the stages of warfare. It's just an academic structure to try to describe these different categories of strategies and tactics. And the most modern one, and each one is made obsolete by some major disruptive technology. And the technology that's enabled fifth generation warfare, of course, is the internet. Fifth generation warfare was so to underscore the point, Facebook and Twitter and Google are CIA designed weapons of war for manipulating opinion. That's what they are. And you can, put all the pretty colors and pictures and paintings and logos you want around it, but that's what they are. They're strategic assets of the U.S. government's intelligence community, and were used as such in the various color revolutions in Arab Spring, and were shown to be very, very effective at overturning governments or enabling coups that the United States military intelligence State Department complex, which Mike Benz calls the blob, which they felt needed to be overturned because of various policy objectives associated with an imperialistic United States. And so that all was well and good. Amazingly powerful tech, combined with things like Gorgon Stare that allows you to be imaged globally in high resolution, together with the power of cellular tracking so that anybody that's within range of even 2 cell towers, let alone 3, can be precisely triangulated in space if they have their own social media appliance that they're using to interface with these tools, which we call cell phones. And I had a client, Behavior Matrix, that built a lot of the technology that's now used in these applications for mapping emotional content and being able to cluster users based on emotional content into influence groups and identify individuals at the fringe of those influence spaces that are promoting various narratives that whoever's in control of the tool wants to have promoted, and so they can amplify those voices and de-amplify or shadow ban other voices that are saying things that are not desired, and in so doing, direct crowd behavior and mass formation. How else do you say it? Crowd psychology. Very effective. And then along comes UKIP and Brexit and Nigel Farage and oh shit, we have a problem. Houston, we've got a problem here. It looks like the European Union that's been so carefully constructed to support other agendas is in danger of the wheels coming off. And if the European Union falls apart, then of course NATO falls apart, and then this core aspect of American foreign policy and military policy falls apart, and we got a problem. So that's got to be resisted. So we need more censorship to preserve democracy, as is being defined by the blob, by the nation state, which is a democracy of we identify who you're allowed to choose between. That's why we end up with the uniparty, right? Which is so prevalent. I mean, you can see it in the transition to power from Rishi Sunak to the new prime minister in the UK, who I'm suddenly blanking on, where essentially they're just exchanging one World Economic Forum surrogate for another. Starmer finally came to me, but they're just exchanging one PM that's closely tied to the World Economic Forum for another PM that's closely tied to the World Economic Forum. This kind of uniparty idea is what they refer to as democracy. And so to preserve democracy, we have to enable censorship and propaganda and all these other things that we're all experiencing, and the weaponization of defamation and slander, etc. They're all just weapons. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, along comes Donald Trump. And now we got a full-blown crisis. And that's kind of where we're at right now in the United States and we're watching it play out on the big screen in real time in Europe right now, and the various machinations that just happened in both the UK elections and in France in particular. So there's a kind of a quickie intro to 5th gen warfare and psychological warfare. And there's a bunch of underpinning psychological research, the Milgram experiment, etc. These insights into human behavior, in particular in the face of crowd pressure or social pressure, akin to what you were referring to. On an individual basis, of course, that applies, but on a mass basis. And one of the more effective technologies that's come to fore is neuro-linguistic programming, which is this new suite of strategies and tactics in information that has to do with repeated messaging. So those vaccines are safe and effective. They're safe and effective. You've seen the clips where they aggregate all of these news media outlets where they're all saying the same script. Okay, that's neuro-linguistic programming. They've been given that script and told to repeat it. And you'll notice, with just not to pick on vaccines or the COVID vaccine, but why not? It's so obvious. But you'll notice that with this repeated mantra of safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, they never define what constitutes safe. And they never define what constitutes effective. Okay, those things are irrelevant because the message is safe and effective. That message gets into your lizard brain. And people that are highly educated, unfortunately, like myself, that have been through 16 years of postgraduate education, are among the most susceptible to this. They tell themselves, oh, I'm so smart. I'm a doctor. I'm this, that, or the other thing. I have all these academic achievements or whatever. And they think that they're immune to this type of thing. But in fact, when you go through the classic academic training that is now the substitute for what used to be a liberal education, where you were taught to think for yourself, now you're taught to memorize and regurgitate and basically accept and integrate authority. You're taught to accept authority and to bring in the narrative from that authority into your mental space, into your reality. And so people that have come out of higher education or are still embedded in it, lost in the craziness of DEI, they've been trained to buy into these things. And so they become the vanguard. They often become the very first to accept the propaganda, the neuro-linguistic programming, all these things. Psychological bioterrorism is a variant of this. And it's absolutely a cluster of weaponized strategies and tactics. It's the weaponization of fear of infectious disease. We're all fearful. Fear is one of our primary drivers as human beings. It's talking about lizard brain. That's way back in there. The book Dune, the famous book by Frank Herbert, and that key little short clip of wisdom, fear is the mind killer. Fear is the mind killer. He absolutely got that right. Fear will destroy your rational mind. It's extremely effective. And the weaponization of existential fear that you're going to die, or by extension, fear that the civilization is going to die or the human species is going to die. That's what's done around climate, is promotion of a fear narrative that's an existential narrative for the entire species. We're all going to die and be made extinct because of anthropomorphic climate change. That humans releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is going to result in the end of the human species, which is seen as a good thing by those who are bought into the narrative of transhumanism, where humans are logically going to die off as a species anyhow, and the world and the universe will be run by machines, basically, or machine-human hybrids. So maybe anthropomorphic climate change is a good thing if you look at it from that way, if you're of the Yuval Harari persuasion. But I assert that the weaponization of fear of infectious disease to manipulate human behavior is fundamentally unethical. It is a transgression against fundamental human morality and ethics. It is using people's innate fear of death in order to manipulate and control them. And you do it by promoting that fear. Promoted fear, the emergence of fear, the raising of fear has a direct, measurable consequence on death rates. Okay? This is not okay. And it's being done again and again for commercial purposes, for political purposes, for all kinds of various agendas. And it is not ethically acceptable behavior. And I assert that people that and this includes the media in spades, people that promote fear of infectious disease as a way to manipulate their fellow human beings need to be shunned and ostracized. I draw the line at censorship. Not saying they should be censored, but they you have a choice of who you let into your mind and who you engage with your podcast, who you engage in dialogue with in your life, okay? What media you consume. And I suggest to your listeners and yourself that people who weaponize fear of infectious disease do not deserve a moment of your time, a fragment of your mental space. They should just be dismissed. They are behaving in ways that are grossly unhuman, anti-human. Unfortunately, our intelligence community has learned that there is a standard set of processes that can be used to build this fear narrative and direct it towards achieving a variety of different objectives, which includes profit. I mean, it's not just the CIA doing this. It's very much part of the marketing of modern pharmaceutical industry.
Do you want to expand your awareness beyond linear, restrictive, self-limiting thinking and rational knowledge and uncover your hidden treasures? Then join our next free webinar and unlock greater fulfillment and accelerate your empowerment. I've supported hundreds of people to free their minds from wrong knowledge and false beliefs, such as the fear of failure, and really have more success naturally. Sign up now to open this possibility for you. When you talk about, or part of the title of your new book is Enforcing the New World Order, is this purely about profit, or what's your understanding of where this leads to? What's the agenda?
So I spoke about this a little bit earlier about these agendas and the hierarchy. And one of the things that has bedeviled me and so many others through this COVID crisis is, to put it simply, who's the puppet master? Who is ostensibly controlling this? And one theory behind that I first heard voiced by Brett Weinstein in that long ago Dark Horse podcast with me and Steve Kirsch. And if you listen all the way through, he says some things. He appeals to Elon Musk to save us by buying Pfizer, and a number of other things. But he makes the point that what we may be observing is an emergent phenomena of complex systems interacting. And that's always a possibility. And these various forces that are moving and driving these agendas and behaviors and initiatives are not necessarily all harmonized. They're not centralized. It's a battleground. It's a psychological warfare battleground of ideas and agendas going on a global scale. But as you look out over the horizon and look at who the major players are, there's an emerging consensus that the Westphalian order concept of the autonomous sovereign nation state, with its rights to not be subjected to interference in its internal affairs by other nation states, which is exactly what the United States does. That's what imperialism breaks that open, right? Imperialism is all about interfering with the internal affairs of other nation states. But that was the original concept in the 1600s, was that individual nation states have sovereignty. They are the ultimate arbiter within their territories of law and culture and all these other things. That's now considered obsolete by many, particularly by these kind of transnational financial community. That is really, it's not absurd. It's not contrivance or a conspiracy to think that these major transnational financial entities. As a Swiss person, you certainly understand power of Swiss banks. Right? These, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the bond markets, they determine what nation, since virtually all the Western nation states are deeply in debt. These financial organizations are able to supersede national politics and national sovereignty. They're able to set the terms within which elected politicians have to operate. This is what we observe with Giorgia Meloni, as I was citing, and this logic of the Malonification of Italy, that she came in as a firebrand and quickly changed her tune when she found out that she really didn't have any options because of Italian debt. The same is true for virtually every single European Union state now. So the point is that these very large financial interests basically control the world. And that includes these very, very large transnational corporations. And those very, very large transnational corporations happen to have a trade union that they all belong to, that they come together in Switzerland in a little township called Davos, and they also come together in China. That's where the recent meeting was. It's two cities in China that they rotate between. And they basically set policy together under the guidance of a small number of leaders. And they also train industrial and political leaders and place them in key positions throughout the West in industry and in government. This is the Young Leaders Program, World Economic Forum Young Leaders Program. So all these very, very large financial interests believe clearly, if you read, if you believe what they say and what they write, and that's not just another psychological manipulation, that's not just more PsyWar. If you actually listen to what they say, they seem to firmly believe that the concept of the autonomous nation state is obsolete, that a world led by this decentralized network of autonomous nation states is not able to address the really big problems, like, say, global climate change or ocean pollution. Or a lot of this thinking is really wrapped around neo-Malthusianism as expressed in the Tragedy of the Commons. The idea that when you have common lands, they all get abused. That's actually doesn't hold water in modern academic thought. It's been examined, and it doesn't really hold up. But that's these people that share this worldview of corporatism believe that for a variety of reasons, including reduction in friction in transactional costs, the world needs to be harmonized with harmonized culture, harmonized rules and regulations, harmonized business practices, harmonized currency that can be fiat currency that can be managed, and another word for managed is manipulated, so that we have, say, harmonized inflation, so that we don't have these inflationary imbalances that I was talking about earlier between nation states, but it can all be kind of modulated in a common fashion. We call this central bank digital currency under the guidance of the Bank of International Settlements, another thing that any Swiss person is well familiar with. The thesis seems to be that this network of autonomous nation states under the structure of the Treaty of Westphalia, loosely, it goes back to the 1600s, that's now obsolete. And now we need a structure that sits above nation states. What's that structure going to be? Well, it's basically coalesced into the United Nations, and its partner organizations, one of which is the World Economic Forum. And these influence think tank organizations that sit above even the corporatist structure, which is these global public-private partnerships. That basically, there's a number of organizations that we can name that have been functioning like this: the Atlantic Council, Club of Rome. There's a variety of these organizations, often deeply influenced by the United States, and the United States intelligence community and State Department, that are cooperating now more and more with these very large economic entities and transnational corporations in these public-private partnerships, which I assert meet the criteria that Benito Mussolini set out for the definition of this term called fascism. Fascism is another word that's been weaponized and distorted to apply to, paradoxically, any center-right political movement is now called fascist. But that's not the meaning of fascism. Fascism is corporatism. And we now have, under leadership of the WEF, this concept of kind of socialized capitalism that is called stakeholder capitalism, that these financial entities have all bought into, I think basically because they think it's a way to mitigate the backlash against pure capitalism. Particularly in Europe, people here in the States, and I don't know about Mexico, but in the States, socialism is more or less considered to be a bad thing, certainly by a large fraction of the population. In Europe, it's largely believed to be the way of the future. The European states seek to be socialistic and to endorse the welfare state. We just saw this backlash in France. And so stakeholder capitalism is crafted to message to economies and nation states and populace that have a pro-socialist bias and an anti-capitalist bias. So it's kind of putting a nice face to mask. It's a mask on these large corporatist structures as they go about their business. And their profit is maximized when they become monopolies, or they can act in monopolistic fashion, and they can basically subvert leadership in nation states, as we saw happening with the COVID crisis, where nation states were forced into terms and conditions if they were going to get access to, say, the Pfizer vaccine, that were not in their best interest, where they had to put up as collateral things like ports or airports, tangible assets of the nation state had to be put up as collateral to guarantee the terms and conditions under which Pfizer would agree to sell them the product, because Pfizer, together with others, had been able to successfully promote this fear narrative, in other words, psychological bioterrorism, on the populace, and the populace puts pressure on the politicians. The politicians don't have any choice. They have to go along with these egregious terms and conditions because they're no longer in control. Because with this kind of suite of technologies and capabilities, these very large transnational corporations are able to set public policy and the agendas through a variety of schemes. And of course, bonds and interest rates are one, but weaponized fear is another one. And it's very, very effective as a basically marketing and power play. And so when you ask, where is all this at, and what is this power structure? What we've really had is the subjugation of the autonomous nation state to a new transnational structure, world structure, that is positioning itself as the New World Order, a global government, ostensibly structured in a socialistic way in alignment with Agenda 2030 within the context of the United Nations, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, et cetera. And these organizations are now stepping out overtly and asserting that they do represent the new world government, and that they have, through the treaties that they've established, built a bulwark of international law that empowers and entitles them to now assert authority that transcends the authority of individual autonomous nation states. And so, when you hear these words like make Europe great again or make America great again, and all the backlash against isolationism or nationalism, here's a fun fact. If you fly the German flag in Germany, you're accused of being a Nazi.
Yes.
It's stunning. The effectiveness of weaponization of nationalism against people as a surrogate for, far right. Anybody that is a nationalist is by definition far right now. So that's the book lays this all out, and the kind of mechanics and examples and statements, specific quotes from the WEF, from Agenda 2030, from the United Nations. This is what I spoke about in our protests against the World Health Organization Pandemic Accord and international health regulations when I spoke in Geneva a few weeks ago at a protest rally. That's we're facing a group of extremely powerful, extremely well capitalized individuals who've convinced themselves that a centrally planned economy and centrally planned world governance based on advanced abilities to capture and manipulate data using artificial intelligence, et cetera. This is why all the emphasis on social credit system, data capture from individuals, et cetera. This is basically set up to drive what's called agent-based modeling. The thesis is that if they only had enough data, then the flaws that are inherent in socialism and in centralized economic planning can be overcome. And that it totally overlooks, the fascinating thing for me is you listen to the WEF and Klaus Schwab, and they trumpet the importance of innovation, for instance. But innovation and centralized planning cannot live together. They are diametrically opposed. Innovation comes from the activities of individuals and small groups attempting to solve problems in a decentralized fashion. That's what drives innovation. Centralized command economy planning and control is intrinsically anti-innovative. And the paradox here is these people believe in these Malthusian ideas that the human species is going to destroy the earth by population expansion and consumption of resources. And so their reaction is not to enable problem solving or innovation to address, first of all, to define whether these really are the problems, such as the many misinterpretations that have occurred with anthropomorphic climate change on the artifacts that have biased the modeling results. But they seem to believe that the only solution is depopulation, And yet, paradoxically, at the same time, they're enabling mass migration into the Western economies that are having population reduction because the propaganda around limiting family size has been so effective over the last half a century that they're now experiencing a fairly steep population decline, and they can no longer basically tax the young in order to capitalize the welfare state for the old. And so they're having to import new young. And so they this paradox that they say, well, we have to reduce the population, but then they overlook the consequences of their population reduction plans that have been implemented for the last half century on Europe, China, North America, et cetera. This is just like the COVID crisis, which was a massively bungled public health fiasco that was centrally planned and organized. They seem to have this blindness to their repeated failures to successfully employ modeling, because that's what drove the COVID crisis mismanagement, was basically crummy modeling from Neil Ferguson in the Imperial College in London. It's repeated failure to predict the nature of the world based on modeling algorithms that underlies a lot of these policy failures and mismanagements, but yet they want to double down on modeling and double down on centralized control and planning, which is why I say, for the likes of you and I, and perhaps your listeners, we're going to have to batten down the hatches and weather the storm in a way in which we learn to be more self-reliant, because we can no longer depend. I grew up believing that the government was our friend, that the government was a benign hand trying to steer us into the uncertain future with all the best intentions. And clearly that is a demonstrable falsehood. So now, who can you turn to? The only recourse is yourself. There, I've talked myself out.
Yeah, that's so insightful. So it's really about taking responsibility back versus New World Order is outsourcing responsibility to some experts, gremiums, transnational organizations.
And it's not just experts, it's experts with a financially vested interest. So there's a thread, we wrote about it in our Substack, Green Imperialism.
Yeah.
So the World Bank, together with the United States government, State Department, et cetera, and all their various satellites, USAID, et cetera, have imposed this policy on the developing economies that they will not receive any capital to develop their endogenous energy resources. Africa is rich in natural gas, okay? And to slip back into economic theory, a case can be made that the only real money is energy. Everything else is a surrogate or a derivative, okay? So now the World Bank and all of the apparatus surrounding that has set a policy that they will not capitalize any energy projects in the emerging economies that involve petrochemicals or petroleum. Only green energy, ergo windmills, solar panels, etc., which all benefit financially, not the African nation states. These are the most expensive forms of energy, but they happen to be ones that are manufactured by Western and Chinese corporations. So the very people that are basically guiding the imposition of this new green imperialism, where you have to comport with green policies or you can't get capital, because that's how they're controlling everything. DEI, ESG, energy policy, et cetera, is all controlled through control of capital. And so they basically are telling the emerging economies, we will not enable you to develop your own endogenous energy resources. You have to buy and import the energy technology that we will sell you. That's the only thing we will give you loans for, is to buy our stuff. Okay? This is twisted. Again, this is fundamentally unethical, but it's the way of the world now. My point is that these people that are using the language of ethics and socialism and doing good for the world and stakeholder capitalism, in the back room, they're all making book on this. They're all making profit and weaponizing these masks, these fronts, in order to advance their own corporate agendas. And that is the way of the world. If we allow corporatism to dominate global government, then our children are locked into a world where they are basically serfs to these large transnational organizations.
Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your experiences and research. One thing I'm curious, because you're giving so many speeches or on so many podcasts, you're writing continuously. Do you see a trend? Do you see more people being receptive for the perspectives you're sharing?
I fear selection bias. I'm surrounded by people who are resisting the narrative, and so it's really easy to convince myself that we're convincing more people. Those that are in opposition, that are promoting these false narratives about the nature of the world, have enormous resources and are basically, through their control of media, through psychological warfare, are able to convince the persuadable middle that we're crazy, radicals, far right, all these euphemisms, all the defamation and character assassination is part of a strategy to delegitimize our voices so that the persuadable middle will not listen to us. And so it's really easy to convince yourself that the 20% of the population that's very resistant to this kind of manipulation and to hypnosis, that they represent the majority, because they're very loud, just like those that are very easily propagandized. We can call them the left or whatever, people that accept and believe strongly in the promoted narratives. They're very noisy also. And so I'm cautiously optimistic, but it's incremental. It's little tiny baby steps. The other day, and actually it was released yesterday, the podcast that I did with Nicole Shanahan. I flew out to her house in Malibu from the East Coast and did a podcast with her talking about propaganda, talking about the book. Nicole Shanahan, for those that are not aware, is former wife of one of the founders of Google, and the vice presidential candidate teamed with Bobby Kennedy. A fairly young 30-something single child who happens to be autistic and is now divorced and a billionaire as a consequence from her former spouse that owns Google, basically, together with his partner. She's on a journey of discovery, and she was a classical California liberal. Yoga, healthy lifestyle, met her husband, ex-husband, at Burning Man, which is basically, fast forward from the 60s to the present, not to be Right. But a lawyer whose focus is artificial intelligence law. And now she is awake and learning and interviewing people like Mike Benz, myself, Tucker Carlson, and really on this journey from being a mainstream progressive California young woman to we'll see. I don't know where her journey is going to lead. Is she going to become a conservative? Is she going to join Bobby in trying to reform the Democratic Party? Is she going to retreat and focus on her own personal life and her child? I have no idea. But she represents what you might hope would be happening is people waking up and starting to ask questions. As we were talking about propaganda and censorship and all these things on her podcast, she talked about how you have a moment where suddenly things don't make sense. And I said, yeah, it's like you encounter a crack in the matrix, using that metaphor, and you look into it, and the more you look into it, the more you see. And then pretty soon you can never go back. You can never be that old self that you were. And she's on that journey. I don't know where that journey is going to take her. But if she can do that, I think others can. And she's exactly the kind of person that we need because she is of that culture. She is podcasting to late teen and 20-something young women. Young professional hippy-dippy women that like yoga and holistic foods and all of that stuff. And she's saying to these women, hey, you got to start questioning the narrative. You got to start looking deeper into things. And that's why I say it's incremental. It's little baby steps. We need people like that, and we need to support them. And unfortunately, one of the ugly things that happens is that often these people get attacked by the very people that they're trying to learn from as controlled opposition, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, she was affiliated with Google. Oh, she's a lawyer. Oh, she was at Bernie, Okay. And so she's illegitimate. We can't listen to her. She's part of the opposition. And so that then creates a situation that I've experienced where, I guess, which is part of why she had me on, where you're getting shot at from every side. People that are promoting the false narratives are shooting you in various ways. And the people that you thought you were working to support and help, they're also shooting you. So that's what Nicole is encountering, and I've encountered, and so many others have encountered. It's profoundly dysfunctional. So if we're gonna wake people up, we got to start by stopping the circular firing squads, in my opinion.
Robert, I'm so appreciative of the time you're taking for speaking to us and our audience here. I have this last question, which I'm so curious.
Okay, what's the last question?
Yeah, what's your perspective on Robert F. Kennedy? Is he a real alternative to Trump Biden? Does he have a chance to win the election?
So I know Bobby quite well, and we used to be fairly close friends. But we have kind of parted ways. Matter of fact, I've got a campaign button from him sitting on my here in my studio. I'm just looking at it. My perspective on Bobby, again, I'm not going to self-censor. Bobby has a big heart. He has had a lot of hard things happen in his life. He was a heroin addict. He's recovered heroin. His father and his uncle were assassinated, probably by the CIA. He believes they were, as part of a coup, a kind of an ongoing coup that happened in the 60s. You know, if that had happened to me, I don't think I would have been able to recover. The very fact that he's standing and speaking and fighting for what he believes to be true is a profound, deep indicator of his soul, of his personality, of who he is. However, he is very influenced by the words and thoughts of his father and his uncle. He believes in the new society. He believes in the welfare state. It's as if Jimmy Carter never happened, let alone Ronald Reagan. He speaks about of being a Kennedy Democrat, of wanting to return the Democratic Party to its principles of the 60s. But those principles include the New Deal. Also, I had a direct, personal, considerable interactions with Children's Health Defense. And Children's Health Defense is a hot mess. They are just, talk about backbiting and internal small politics. CHD is not well run. And Bobby was chairman of the board until his election campaign. And I had personal experiences of observing dysfunctionalism in various CHD chapters and alerting Bobby to them. And his response was, he really doesn't want to get involved. Now, that is not going to work in DC. And so what I see in Bobby is a big heart, a deeply ethical person, a person who has overcome major personal adversity. These are all really good things. It would be lovely in many ways to have a leader of the United States who was fundamentally ethical and was willing to learn and listen, who is an intellectual, who doesn't have these narcissistic tendencies that we see all over DC. It's not just Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We seem to select for them in our leaders. There's a whole lot of good about Bobby Kennedy. However, from what I know of DC culture, which is significant, he will be eaten alive. He is just not powered to lead the federal bureaucracy and to transform it. He makes the case that as a lawyer, he's fought and won repeatedly against the administrative state in a variety of areas, including, of course, water purity. Waterkeepers is his core base, and pollution. There's a whole lot of things to like. That's his argument, is he has this experience. He knows how to battle the administrative state. I think that he's fooling himself about that. Is Donald Trump a better option? There's a whole bunch of things about what's going on with Donald Trump right now, not the least of which is his support, ongoing support for Operation Warp Speed and the jab. That and having now, I have many colleagues because of what's gone on the last 4 years myself that are rock rib conservatives, many of which have served in prior Trump administrations, and are still interacting with him on a weekly or daily basis. When what I hear from them is he's surrounding himself with the old group, which is to say, basically surrounding himself with people that have proven to be incompetent sycophants. That is not encouraging. Joe Biden is a vegetable. He's not running the White House. You know, if anybody, Jill is, or Barack Obama, I don't know who's running the White House, but it's not Joe. So he's not a credible option to carry the nuclear football or to lead NATO. Is Donald Trump? Steve Bannon makes the case that Donald Trump is a wartime president. He's battle scarred. He's experienced it. He's experienced all the lawfare. He's experienced all these dirty tricks. And he has people like Kash Patel and others around him that are ready to go to work. Unlike when he was elected initially, and he was kind of caught flat-footed without enough depth at the bench for his appointments. The wild card in all of this is the recent Supreme Court determination concerning Chevron deference. This court case that overturned this prior judicial precedents that the agencies are considered to be experts in their domain by the courts. And so the courts and the judiciary and Congress would defer to the administrative state, which allowed this explosion of administrative law that was not written into law by Congress. And that's all been overturned. We're now going to have a decade of legal cases tearing apart the underpinnings of the administrative state that have been built up over the last 20 years. And that's going to be a real asset for if Bobby or Donald Trump get in the White House. The scenario that's discussed, that I've been discussing for a long time about Bobby's trajectory, is if he can get on the ballot and garner enough electoral college votes that neither Trump nor Biden can get to 270. That throws the election into the House. And it, by the way, precipitates a constitutional crisis because the amendment that makes it so the House will adjudicate that, where there's one elector per state, doesn't define who gets to appoint the electors. The outgoing House, the incoming House that won't be sworn in yet, the governors of the states, who knows, okay? But if Bobby acts as a spoiler, the theory currently floated by his supporters is that it throws it into the House and Bobby becomes the path of least resistance. The Republicans won't vote for the Democrat won't vote for the Republican, and Bobby becomes some sort of a compromise, and then he can get elected as a third party sitting over all of this hot mess. And God save him if that happens, because I would not want that job. I don't want that job anyhow. But that's going to be 4 years of hell. But that's the scenario that's pitched as to how Bobby ends up in the big chair, is by being a spoiler in the Electoral College and throwing it into the House. That almost gets down to a level of religion, of an article of faith and belief. Do you believe that could really happen? Or are there too many structural barriers to that? That seems to be where things are at right now in terms of Bobby's camp, that I still have some touch points with. So that's how I see that. But I don't think he's got the chops. I think he could for the next election, if he's not too old and too burned out by then. But people that I know that are hardcore in his super PACs, etc., want him to be all in on this election, not even to be thinking about the next one. So I don't know. It's all up in the air right now. My crystal ball is murky. I don't see a clear pathway. And if you held the gun to my head and said who's going to be the next president, I would say it's probably going to be Donald Trump.
Robert, thank you so much. Where can people best learn more about you, your work, follow you?
Well, you can read the books. I get a little bit personal in both of them.
Yeah.
As I said, the PsyWar book is going to go live location for shipping at the end of August. You can pre-purchase it now on Amazon, but I'm not advising you should or shouldn't.
Yeah.
Lies the Government Told Me is already out there. Jill and I, my wife and partner in all things for almost 50 years now, co-write this Substack, Who is Robert Malone, which is a play on Who is John Galt for any of you who are Ayn Rand fans. That you can subscribe for free, or you can choose to pay a monthly fee or an annual fee, which is all of my income now. All of this travel and everything is all supported by my followers that are actually paid subscribers, but you don't have to pay. You can just subscribe and it comes in your email unless you're censored. I'm censored in your nation state, but I think Mexico is still okay. I will be at CPAC Mexico coming up since you're there. So that's for my Latin American colleagues. CPAC Mexico, I'm an invited speaker for. But Who is Robert Malone can be found at malonenews.com or org, or at Robert Malone at substack.com. I think that's the way you get at it.
Yeah, we will put the links into the description to this episode,
Yeah.
so everybody.
So the
can
Substack is a mix
access.
of political opinion, commentary about infectious disease and the COVID crisis, and a little bit about this logic of homesteading and small farming and being independent, which a lot of people really seem to enjoy those. And then every Friday and Sunday, Jill publishes her collection of memes, which is the Friday Funnies and the Sunday Strip. We always have a video in that, and that, frankly, is what sustains us. People,
Amazing.
I get, I'll get 150,000 to 250,000 views of on my thought pieces, and they'll hit maybe 30,000 views on X, for example, because I'm shadow banned there. But the meme collections on Friday and Sunday, they're just off the charts. Everybody wants to read. Everybody needs a break. They need a little bit of humor in there. We're all too serious, I think. So that's how to reach me. And then there's the Malone Institute. So that's maloneinstitute.org, in which we have some serious stuff about government corruption, the WEF, the most comprehensive list of World Economic Forum Young Thought Leader trainees, going back to the very start of the program. That's all in a big spreadsheet, so you can search by country or industry or whatever, or name or whatever you want, and find out who the people are in your government and in your industries that are functioning as trained surrogates of the World Economic Forum. That's a good resource for everybody.
Yeah, you will also find the link in the description. Robert, I think you have an important appointment, from what I understood.
Yes, with 17 roosters, and they're not going to enjoy it. But it's raining at the moment, so I don't want to be processing roosters in the rain. But it's been a pleasure. I wish you luck. Stay healthy, happy, and safe.
Thank you so much for your time, your dedication, this very insightful conversation. And also the audience, if you enjoyed this interview, please share it, subscribe to our channel, and most importantly, stay true to yourself and see you next time.